Hello, everyone out there. Today we're looking at a spectacular game from round 5 of the 2016 United States Chess Championship. This game took place between Grandmaster Wesley Slow, Wesley So with the white pieces, and Grandmaster Akobian with the black pieces. Okay, the game started off with e4. e6 by Akobian, who is an strong adherent of the French defense. But what variation are we going to go into? d4, d5. Now it's up to white to pick the variation. Just for our beginners out there, there are several continuations that are viable for white at this point. Knight d2, known as the Terrace. Knight c3 can be played. e5, which is known as the advanced variation, can be played. And then, of course, there's a few offbeat variations that also can be played, such as f3, that are not particularly sound. But Grandmaster So played classical move knight c3, simply defending the attacked pawn in the center and hoping that black gives up his center. As we discussed in a previous video, giving up the center means exactly that a player will give up his influence in the center by trading off his pawns. So for example, in this position right here, black has influence on the e4 square and the c4 square due to the presence of the black pawn on d5. So he is staking a claim in the center, as we like to say. But if he plays the move d takes e4, and after knight takes e4, that pawn is gone, and we can say that black has given up his center. This leaves white with more space, because now, as we can see, a piece can occupy a square on e4 where previously it was not possible, and also a piece can occupy, or a pawn for that matter, can occupy the c4 square, whereas before that was not possible. And this is one of the very important reasons why we usually do not recommend giving up the center. And many chess openings revolve around the fight for the center. For example, just to go back, for instance, after e4, e5, f4, the king's gambit, the idea is to get black to give up his influence in the center. For instance, by taking, and ideally, right, in a perfect world, white would love to play this move and have a full center. But unfortunately, tactically, it's not possible because of the queen check at h4, forcing the king to move. This is why knight f3 is played most of the time. And then white desires to take command of the center. Okay, so back to our game. The d5, knight c3 was played. Akobian gives up the center. Now, this is known as the Rubinstein variation, named after Grandmaster Akiba Rubinstein, who's one of the great players of all time. So I just gave this speech about how important it is to hold on to the center, and here we have Grandmaster going against this idea and giving up the center. Well, we're going to look at a few miniature games in quick fashion so that you can see what black is trying to achieve in the position as well as what white is trying to achieve. First, we'll look at three fast miniatures from black's point of view to see what black is trying to achieve in giving up the center. First, we're going to look at the game Pranti Linz from Cologne in 1911. Okay, so from this position, black to move, the game went bishop e7, knight f3, knight f6, bishop d3, knight bd7, castle, knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, knight f6 with attack on the bishop, bishop drops back to d3, castle's kingside, bishop g5, h6, bishop e3, b6 in order to develop this so-called bad bishop, c3, c5, queen e2, queen c7, knight e5. Just to comment briefly on this position, it's equal right now, or close to equal. White has a space advantage due to black giving up the center in the opening. Black's general idea here is to accept a position that's similar to the Slav or the Caro-Kann, in that his pawns are usually spearheaded on e6 and c6, and then he seeks to break in the center with c5. So he takes on a cramped but solid position that doesn't have any real pawn weaknesses. As you can see, his pawn structure is pretty healthy. The only thing that black suffers from is a lack of space, but you can see that he has a place to put his bishop. The bishop usually comes on to b7, bearing down on the king side, and sometimes this queen will go from d8 straight to d5, creating a battery and threatening checkmate here. So black's pieces usually find good places to go. The rooks usually come to c8 and d8, and what black is looking for is to weather white's storm, neutralize his space advantage and his activity, and then beat white in the end game. So that's his general ideas. Usually white is trying to use his substantial space advantage to eventually, in his presence on e5, to attack the king side. And you see the battle between these two ideas. Black must be very careful. Although he has a solid position, he must be very careful in this opening. So knight e5 was played, knight h7, which is actually a strange move and not a good one after all, because after bishop f4 it's hard to see exactly what black is going to do. Black might even be lost after that move, but f4 was played instead, which is relatively harmless. But we can see the idea. He fortifies the knight here on e5. In some cases the rook might be able to come up to f3 and go to g3 or h3 as needed, facilitating the attack on the king side. The only thing about that move though is the dark square bishop is not too happy with that. Okay, so I have a couple of more games to show, so I want to keep it moving. I don't want to get caught up in these miniatures, but I do need to show you so that you have the understanding, so that when we get to the actual game, Wesley So Akobian, you can better absorb what's happening. So, okay, so f4 was played. C takes d4. Bishop takes d4. Bishop c5. Now, if you want to pause the video, you can pause it right now, because actually white has a winning move here, and he misses it here. Well, I'm not going to say winning, because we still have a long way to go, but it's definitely having to do with this bishop being unprotected. The knight here, bishop check, and the queen able to come to e4. That's the basic crux of it. So I'm not going to say that white is lost, but black is lost, but it's definitely drifting into inferior position. But that move was not played, so that's good study material. See what would have happened during that continuation. Instead, what happened was white played bishop takes c5, trading down pieces. Queen takes c5, check. King h1, and this helps black to trade off pieces. Knight hops back, f6, and now the game is completely equal. Rook f3, and I don't know if white has noticed that the tide has changed a little bit, but he's still trying to attack. There really is no attack. Rook h3, rook fd8. Black's pieces just fly to natural squares. Rook f1, rook d6, knight c4 with the attack on the knight. Simply rook d5. Rook is in a good spot, as he can swing over for defense if need be. b4, hitting the queen. Queen dropped back to c7. Knight e5. Rook a d8, just doubling. Rook comes back to e3. So we can see that white has kind of ran out of ideas here. King f8, f5. Now you can pause the video here if you want, because there's a tactical blow in this position that black delivers that finishes off the game. So you can pause the video and find the move here, or the continuation rather. Okay, so what happened was, first e takes f5 was played. c4, and black simply played rook takes e5. Rook takes e5. Notice this queen is protecting the bishop and the rook. And now you should be able to see black's next move. Rook takes d3. Queen takes d3. Queen takes e5. And black resigned. Okay, so there you can kind of see what black's ideal setup is there in that kind of position. Okay, I'm gonna go back, and we're gonna look at another black game. This game is from the originator of the variation himself. This game is between Richard Teichmann with the white pieces and Akiba Rubinstein with the black pieces at Bad Piston in 1912. Again, from this position, knight d7 was played. Knight f3, knight g f6, knight takes f6, knight takes f6, bishop d3, b6. Idea is simply just to bring the bishop to a nice square. Queen e2, bishop b7. Now it must be stated that in exchange for black giving up the center, because I didn't fully explain everything that black gains, or the reason why he gives up his center. One of the reasons is that he gets to exchange a set of pieces in the knights, which relieves the cramped nature of his position, and also he gets to solve the problem of his bishop, which is often blocked due to pawn being on d5 and e4. So it's kind of like he is trading one thing for another. He's giving up the center, but he's getting a little bit easier development. Okay, so after bishop b7, Teichmann decided to play bishop b5 check, forcing the bishop to shut itself in behind its own pawn. Slick move. Bishop c4 happened. Rubinstein played queen c7, knight e5, bishop d6, and you can pretty much see that white's plan is pretty consistent. Is to use that space advantage and try to attack over on the king side. Bishop d6, bishop f4, castle, rook a d8, rook a d1, knight d5. So again, we can see this attack on the bishop right here. So after bishop g3, I want to reiterate this pawn structure. We have this kind of Slav, almost Queen's Gambit decline type structure, and you'll see the same pawn structure in different openings. Like for instance, Scandinavian, you'll see it. Some lines of the Alekhines defense with the pawns on e6, c5, and black would love to break with e5, but of course he can't. There's all these pieces and pawns holding up that break. So it's almost imperative that black gets c5 in if he's going to have any counterplay. And that's what he's shooting for in this variation. Is c5. c5 is a must to tear down white's center and break his influence there. Unfortunately for black, is white often has to move c3 just to simply replace the pawn. But what black gets in return after the trade occurs is he gets this open c file for counterplay, as in the Sicilian, and white has this isolated pawn. So again, as I said earlier, black having such a nice pawn structure that if he can weather the storm and make it to the end game, he has good chances. So continuing on, c5 was played, c3, rook f e8. Now I think these rooks are slightly misplaced. I think if they could be moved over a file, it would be great. But the game is still pretty even for the most part. Maybe you can give white the nod due to a slight space advantage, but nothing much more than that. So after rook f8, white took, and white gives up his center. which I believe is a strategic error here, but it's based on a miscalculation, a tactical miscalculation. He thought he could do it here. Okay, so after b takes c5, hold on, I think I made a mistake. Hold on, let's go back. Okay, c3, rook f8. I'm sorry, I apologize. Bishop b5 was played first. Okay, attacking the rook. Then rook f8. Okay, now d takes c5. Okay, now it makes more sense. Okay, so white gives up his center. D takes c5. B takes c5 with this idea of c4. So c4, we can see the pressure building up right here. So c4, Rubinstein plays knight b6, and here is the miscalculation. It's talking about rook takes d6, rook takes d6, knight d7 was Teichmann's idea with this bishop skewering the rook and the queen. After knight d7, bishop takes d6, queen takes d6, and rook d1. Look at that, nice combination, right? And it shows you how far Teichmann saw. He saw for several moves, because now the queen has to move, and then he just picks up the knight. The rook will be on the 7th rank, right? But after rook d1, can you find Rubinstein's move? He simply played queen e5, and white resigned. Of course, he can't play rook or bishop takes on d7 because simply queen takes, right? And if he exchanges queens, then the knight comes out and white is just simply down a piece. Okay, so that was another one. Okay, let's hop back. And one last game from the black side. Let's go back, get our position. Okay, so again, here's Rubinstein again with the black pieces. In the same tournament, the first game against Teichmann was in round 11. This is against Paul Johnner, round 15. So 4 rounds later, in the same tournament. So Johnner has had an opportunity to probably see the game and maybe even talk to Teichmann. And so he has some additional information to go on here. So Rubinstein plays knight d7 again. Same idea, trade off a pair of knights. And the reason why he comes out with knight d7 here, say for instance, and not knight f6, is just avoiding this type of scenario where he has to worry about the bishop coming here, and then he has to play moves like h6, and then white gets a nice jump in development here. This is playable also, but I think Rubinstein's method is better. So instead, he's come out with that knight first. Knight d7, knight f3. Now you bring the knight out, attacking. White doesn't want to waste time. Now you've traded off a pair of knights, and you have these squares open, so it's natural to put your bishop there. So bishop d3, b6. Again, we see the ideas. Castle, all normal looking stuff. Bishop b7, queen e2, Bishop e7, b3. This move is pretty semi-questionable, and there's better moves he could have done. Maybe rook d1, but he wants to develop the bishop here, so we can knock him for having a plan at least. Bishop b3, castle was played. Bishop b2, queen d5. Interesting move. You see the battery of the bishop and queen, and he wants to checkmate white here. I guess c4 could just be played. That's like a natural looking move, gaining space and hitting the queen, and the queen would just go here. Then it's annoying because now you have to deal with the double pawns after bishop takes f3, queen takes, and again that's just right up black's alley. Although the game probably would still be pretty equal because of the bishop here still remaining in white's hands. But that's the idea behind queen d5, is that black is not worried about the move c4. Instead, Genre plays bishop a6. He just wants to trade this guy off. Rubinstein wants to go to the ending. Just equalizes. 95. So now one of white's major plans is already has to be placed on the shelf, and that's the king side attack. So it's going to be very difficult to defeat black with the solid pawn structure and bishop here. So the game is equal, and a great player like Rubinstein is just going to try to outplay his opponent. So after 95, bishop takes c2. Now the natural move is just to play rook fc1 and just gain the pawn back. But this bishop is unprotected, so Genre doing this extra move here, figuring I'll attack this bishop. But the problem with that move is just after bishop d6, now the bishop is protected and this pawn is protected. So basically white had just blundered a pawn there. So real quick, the game went f3, knight d5, bishop b7, rook a e8, knight takes a7, rook b8, bishop c6, knight b4, bishop e4, bishop takes e4, f takes e4, rook a8, knight to b5, knight takes a2, bishop a3, bishop takes a3, rook takes a2, bishop b4, rook e2 was played, c5, d5, rook f d8, rook d1, and rook d7. And Rubinstein went on to win this game. Okay, so now so far we've seen what it looks like from the black side and what black is trying to achieve. But as they say, there's two sides to every story. So now we're going to look at 3 quick miniatures reflecting white side of the case here. So bear with me. Like I said, you will benefit greatly from these games, especially when we get to the Wesley So game. So after knight f3, we're following the game Proust versus Vodka. And this was from 1912 in Breslau. So After 5, knight f3. Actually, we have to go back because the move order was slightly different. So e4, e6, d4, d5, knight c3, d takes e4, knight takes e4, b6 right away as opposed to the knight to d7, knight f3, and we can see the black side falling behind in development. Now the problem with that move order now is, say for instance, if this knight bd7, since this weakness was made here now, bishop b5 kind of makes this look ridiculous now, because now after knight f6, then exactly what black does not want to happen can happen, because this knight is pinned. So that's one of the problems with playing b6 first. But this player is not good as Rubinstein, so he played b6. So knight f3, bishop b7, bishop d3, bishop e7, c3. Now we see knight d7, bishop f4, and we see how easy and fast white's development is. He has a lot of pieces in the center ready to attack. Knight gf6, queen c2, rook c8, queenside castling, a6. Now we just can tell that this move is just way too slow. Rook d e1, knight d5 attacking this bishop, bishop g3, b5, knight e5, knight e7, b6, knight to c5, bishop takes c5, d takes c5, knight a4, and c6 happens, and we see the fate of this bishop is not a good one. Bishop a8, bishop takes h7, g6, and we can see this whole complex is weak. Black is desperate, just trying to pick up this bishop. And of course, as should happen with pieces like this, the position comes crashing down. Knight takes f7. Right, remember that move. Knight takes f7. And remember the pawn structure too. It's weak pawn structures. Knight takes f7. King takes f7. Queen to g6. Check. King f8. Rook takes e6. Look at these pieces, man. Oh boy. Knight a b6. Queen f5. King g7. That's all kind of brutality going on. Bishop e5. Check. Knight f6. And just simply bishop takes f6. And of course, white resigned. So we see what white is trying to do. The next game, quick game, was 1913 between Oscar Tenner and Julius Brock, the white pieces. e4, e6, d4, d5, knight c3, d takes, knight takes. You see knight d7 again, knight f3, knight gf6, trade off pair of knights. Bishop d3, c5. So black goes for his break immediately. Attacks the center. Takes. Bishop takes c5. Bishop g5. Initiating a pin on the knight. Castle. Excuse me. Castle. Black has to move first. Queen e2. Bishop e7. White castles queen side. Queen a5. King b1. Rook d8. Knight e5. And I just want to point out that just because white does not have a pawn on d4 does not mean he does not have control over the e5 square. As we can see, the queen is exerting enough influence where the knight can occupy this square. So it can be said that white has control of this square. And since he does have control of this square, the same ideas of the king side attack are possible. So just remember that just because your d4 pawn gets traded off doesn't mean your king side attack is diminished. So after knight e5, queen c7, f4. So black decides to reinforce, white decides to reinforce his knight with f4. Bishop d7. Now we saw in all the other games that this bishop always ended up on b7. Here it goes to d7. And perhaps since white is castle queen side, he figures maybe he can push these pawns or something. But he doesn't have time to do that because there's some tactical shots that's coming. First is bishop takes h7 check. Keep an eye on this unprotected piece right there, because that's where you're going to get a lot of your combinations. You notice some kind of unprotected piece, because other than that the position looks pretty respectable. But this guy is just kind of hanging alone, and we see opportunities here. So bishop takes h7, king f8, and he just comes right back out. Bishop d3. Now just real quick, right, I'm sorry, first we'll look at this, right? If king takes h7, then we just remove this bishop from here, and let's say bishop takes f6, then this is very strong. Let's see, and after bishop takes h7, if knight takes h7, then we have this guy that's unprotected, and we just take right here. And then this rook is attacked, and then if the rook is moved, then we'll take this bishop. So this is why king f8 was settled on. Okay, so after king f8, bishop d3, rook ac8, rook he1, bishop e8, h4, knight d5, queen h5 happened, bishop takes g5, F takes G5. Although I think Queen H8 is just winning too. But we'll just go with the game. And also, of course, H takes G5 is brutal. So F takes G5 was played. This guy went back. 97. Again, Queen H8. There's multiple wins here, but just to show you the themes and what white is trying to do in the position with the king side attack. I showed you what black is trying to do. Now you're seeing what white is doing. So he's trying to keep the position closed as much as possible. Queen H8 finally comes. Knight G8. Last defensive attempt. And you wonder, wow, how am I going to get to the king? He just plays H5. Rook D5 is played. Knight G4. Queen F4. Simply H6. Of course, the knight cannot be captured because this pawn will go here. So G takes, and then a bolt out of the blue. Just simply rook takes E6, and of course, after queen takes G4, rook takes F6. This knight is pinned and cannot capture the rook. King E7, rook E1 check, king D7, and queen G7 check, and it will be mate in short order. So black resigned. For instance, after king D8, just whoops, sorry about that, people. So simply rook takes E8 and mate. Okay, and one more, and then we'll get to our featured game. So D5, knight C3, D takes, knight takes, knight D7. This game is from one of the founders of the Russian school of chess, Ilya Rubinovich, and with the white pieces and with the black pieces, another giant of Soviet chess school is Alexei Seleznev. This game was in Freiburg, 1915. So I'm going to go through this one real fast since you should be pretty familiar with the themes already. Space advantage, king side attacking possibilities, lead in development versus a solid but cramped position. Bishop D3, knight GF6. This time both sides castle on the queen side. Notice that even though white castles on the king side or queen side, he still basically has the same plan of conducting the king side attack. B6, we know what's happening with that. Knight takes, knight takes. Bishop G5. And the idea here is this move is pretty much forced right now because for instance, let's do like a bad move. For instance, say no H6, then simply bishop takes, right? Bishop takes F6, and then queen E4, threatening mate, and it's unprotected rook. Remember, always look for the unprotected. And the game is over right there. So this is why Bishop B7 has to be played right after Bishop G5 is played. Rook AD1. Again, it's always good to put your heavy pieces in the same diagonal or file as the queen. Knight D7. looking to trade some more pieces off. Now, since you've seen the other games, who would this benefit, black or white? Right? White is trying to build up an attack, so he doesn't want to trade pieces. He plays bishop c1. Now he could have played bishop f4. He plays bishop f1. Not ready to trade pieces right now. Queen e8. Rook fe1. Still building. Bishop f6. Now he comes with tempo to f4. Queen c8. Knight e5. You see, now he places his knight on e5, and of course the knight can take there, but it would benefit white. White would gain time and placing a dangerous pawn on e5. So of course he's willing to do it then. Willing to allow a trade under those circumstances. g6. Okay, so we have a weak structure here. This is an inherently weak structure. So when I say weak structure, I'm not saying that there's a move that white can do right away to win, but just understand that that structure by nature is weak and that it's very fragile. Okay, so after g6 was played, bishop h6. Again, rook e8 was played, and again white would then welcome a trade after, say, bishop g7, because these dark squares would be weak, and white would welcome that trade. So after rook e8, queen g4 was played. So again, we see the ideas, the kingside attack. Notice the build up against the light squares. That's why I say this structure is inherently weak. It's like an old, old house just waiting for a windstorm to come to blow it down. All right. So after queen g4 was played, knight takes e5. He's trying to alleviate some of the pressure. D takes e5. Notice black doesn't go there. Black doesn't want to lose his dark square bishop, so he goes here. Bishop e7. But that loss of time allows white to continue with this plan. So now h4. The idea of simply h5. So now desperation starts kicking in. Bishop f8. Again, he could trade here, right? But he decides to play bishop g5. c5, h5, queen c7, rook e3, just adding more firepower. Bishop c6, bishop f6, bishop g7, rook h3, bishop takes f6, e takes f6. Now this is looking really dangerous. Rook a d8, and simply queen g5 was played with the idea of queen h6 and queen to d5, and black resigned. Alright, thank you for your patience there. Now we can go on to our featured game between Wesley So with the white pieces and Akobian with the black pieces. Those games were over 100 years old, and we see the same stuff today. There's knight d7. Look at that. Right, it was played in 1912, and it's being played in 2016. Knight f3, knight gf6. Look at that. 100 years difference, just as modern. So let's c3. And it has the same idea as before, is to just fortify the center, anticipating the early c5. Bishop e3. Bishop takes d4. So black has achieved his break, and but he still has the same thing. Remember what I said about the control over e5. He doesn't have a pawn here. He doesn't have a pawn on d4, but the bishop and the knight exert so much influence that we can say that white controls e5. White is able to put a piece there if he wants to. Black cannot advance his pawn to e5 without it being captured, nor can he put a piece there. So, although his pawn is gone, white still maintains control over e5. Another thing that is important to notice too in the endgame is 3 to 2 pawn majority can often prove fatal also. But by itself, black should be able to maintain a draw. But if he has other weaknesses combined with that, sometimes this can be a lot of trouble in an ending. So let's go on. Bishop e7. Solid defensive move. Remember what I said about black's position here is that solid but cramped. Bishop d3. And we can already see the power of black's bishops in contrast to, white's bishops in contrast to black's bishops. There's no comparison. Castle, again, very solid. Black has no structural weaknesses in his pawns. It's just his only real weakness is a lack of space and a lack of influence in the center. Queen c2. A minor threat here to take and win a pawn. So h6. So now I just provoke some weakness, right? Just a little bit of weakness there. Queenside castling. The position almost plays itself. Again, remember what I said about lining up heavy pieces against the opponent's king or queen on the file is good to do. Well, we see that again 100 years ago. We see it now 100 years later. Queen a5. We've seen this story before, right? And we've seen king b1 before. That's why it's good to be familiar with old games. Rook d8. And Akobian is playing pretty solid, right? He's doing the best he can with the position that he has. The only thing he has to deal with now is this bishop right here on c8, which usually ends up here, and then get this rook out into the game. Knight e5. Again, we saw that. We see. Remember what I said about control versus occupation. We see who controls the e5 square. This is one of the downsides about trading the knights early, is that now usually there's another knight here to fend this knight off. But now there's only one knight, and that knight is here helping to defend the king side. So this knight is on e5 is kind of unopposed. But again, we already know from looking at the games, white's plan is to blow up the king side here. Bishop d7. We've seen this move before. Like I said, another idea is b6 and the bishop coming there. So now the queen is astute and moves to e2, influencing b5, because one of the possibilities of the move maybe later on down the road was a move like bishop b5, perhaps trading off these light squared bishops. There's queen e2. And there's other moves possibilities here also, is eventually the queen coming up in front of the bishop and trading off. For instance, after getting rid of this knight, maybe with a move like g4, g5, etc., h4, and then creating that mating threat. Okay, so bishop c6. So he puts the bishop on the diagonal, and he kind of tries to provoke, a trade. Some beginning chess players, or I can't even say beginning chess players, but maybe some with lesser understanding would try to take that bishop with the knight. But you gotta understand, this is a fantastic knight, and it would be against your plans of attacking over here to even consider taking this bishop right here. Also, taking this bishop would allow black counterplay with the open b file to put his rook on. So those point to a no to such a move, and then of course his bishop would love to come here in that scenario. So what does Grandmaster So do? He just develops his last piece. Now he's fully developed, and notice he leaves a poison pawn there for black. Does black take it? No. He challenges, he threatens to capture this pawn first. c4 is played. So the pawn structure is changed a bit. His bishop is challenged, and now he can either go back or he can take Wesley up on this challenge. Now this is a tempting move to make, because after c4 the rook is hitting the bishop, so it looks like he can just steal a pawn and get out of there. He simply drops back and gains a tempo on the queen. Queen b6. Rook g1. Now, I don't care what engines might say. Engines might try to say this position is equal and stuff like that. This is a position that you don't want to really have as black, because this is one mistake away from disaster. I mean, yeah, maybe with exact and perfect play, perhaps you can hold the draw, but this is not the type of position that you want here. So rook g1 is played. Bishop just shoots back to c6, and knight takes f7. And this is a brilliant move, especially in time trouble that Akobian was in. Just ripping open the king side, and all the pieces are going to flood in now. So king takes f7. There goes the the rook right up the file, and this is just brutal. Queen takes e6, and now this rook is coming over. You got all of this going on. Knight is pinned. This guy hasn't even laced up his shoes to get in the game yet. Notice all the pieces on the queen side. You got 4 pieces on the queen side. This bishop is on prise, is just hanging. So what to do? He grabs a pawn, and of all things, and I mean, it was already bad for him to grab the g2 pawn, but he actually grabs this pawn also, and of course he just took on e7. I mean, the only real thing he could have possibly done is probably maybe try rook e8 or something like that, but it's just too much. Rook g1 check, king f8, And then probably easiest is maybe just bishop takes f6. And I remember on the broadcast today there were some lines with amazing lines with bishop g2, because you have this going on. You can't take this because the queen is hanging. And then you go into some kind of complex ending. The rook takes, queen here, and you have this crazy ending right here. I think white is still better because of the pawns or the material. But again, that's super hard to find in any kind of time pressure. So he didn't find that. He found queen takes f2, and after queen takes e7, mate is on the way, because there's no way you're getting out of that. So now he just moves the king back. Check. That's brutal, because he could have took the bishop, right? But just simply bishop takes f6, and the mate is still, you would have to give up the queen, but he hits him with this move. Now if knight takes, this guy is here, so there's a checkmate on g7. So he just resigned after that. So you can play the Rubinstein variation of the French if you want to, but just be sure to understand fully the ramifications and consequences of that line. So I hope you learned a lot from that video. I know it was kind of long, but that's the best video you're going to see on the internet on this, best analysis you're going to see on the internet on this game today. It's thorough and concise, and you're going to learn a lot if you continue to follow. So subscribe, share, and like, and I'll see you guys on the next round. I'll probably do the Nakamura Shanklin game tomorrow. So I'm going to get some sleep, and I'll see you then.